We're going to interrupt that report now for some breaking news. Iranian state TV is now reporting several strong explosions in Iran. Sources telling ABC News that this is the beginning of Israel's retaliation against Iran. This comes on the heels of that Iranian missile barrage into Israel. Most of those missiles intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. Iran's attack came in part in response to Israel's killing of Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in Lebanon. And just last week, Israel forces killed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz joins us now. And Martha, what are your sources telling you? We have been waiting for this to happen. We just did not know when it was going to happen, but it appears it is happening tonight.
It sure does. And in fact, Phil, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have now put out a statement saying in response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the state of Israel, right now, the Israeli Defense Forces are conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. Now, I think saying they are military targets is exactly what the United States wanted them to leave this to. They did not want them to attack nuclear forces. They did, or nuclear sites, rather. They did not want them to attack oil infrastructure. And it looks like Israel got the message on that. We don't know how extensive the bombing is, but they do say they were precise strikes. Again, there are some explosions reported in Tehran, but those clearly could be military strikes as well. The IDF goes on to say the regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. As you mentioned, Phil, just about 3 weeks ago, Iran fired that barrage of missiles toward Israel. That was a night where their defense systems did very well, but did not stop them all. And in fact, one of those missiles landed very near one of the Israeli spy facilities. And Israel goes on to say, like every other sovereign country in the world, the state of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. So I think this could go on for several hours, but again, they have said quite clearly they are making precision strikes against military targets. There are, of course, numerous military targets throughout Iran. A U.S. official I spoke to earlier this evening said if they go big, and at the time the official was not sure exactly how big this would be, it will be harder for Iran not to strike back. And that's what the U.S. is watching very carefully. The U.S. is not involved in this action in any way, but of course, if Iran strikes back, the U.S. will help defend Israel. Phil?
Yeah, and Martha, as we're talking about what happened just a few weeks ago in these ballistic missiles that were fired, there was also a barrage fired back in April. That was Iran's response to Israel hitting an embassy in Syria and killing 3 IRGC commanders. This is now a back and forth. The IDF said on 7 fronts now, but this is what really the world, the UN, Israel has been, America has been concerned with, a wider conflict in this area. And all these proxies from Iran have been involved. And now it looks like Iran directly is involved with Israel.
Exactly, Phil. And they have been before, as you said, many months ago. That did not escalate it particularly. It certainly was tamped down for a while after that. But this back and forth keeps continuing. But the U.S. has had an intense diplomatic effort with Benjamin Netanyahu, trying to talk him into keeping this within certain limits and going after just military targets. Now, if those are massive military targets, that's something else altogether. But as of right now, it does not look, according to their language, which we don't know how precise that language is, that they have not gone after oil infrastructure, which the U.S. and the rest of the world was very worried about, or those nuclear facilities. They would likely, if they did real damage to those nuclear facilities, would have needed some help from the U.S., but they could have done partial damage to some of those nuclear facilities and set back the nuclear program that they're involved with now by months or weeks, but they couldn't have really taken it out. I think most analysts will tell you, unless they had the help of the U.S., and they did not have the help of the U.S. And we're talking about refuelers, so their planes could fly longer. We're talking about bigger bombs. That doesn't appear to have happened.
Martha, let's take a step back for just 1 second. Few people have covered this region like you. You have been there countless times just within the last couple of years, but you've been covering this part of the world for decades. What is the difference now than in prior conflicts? Is this the worst we've seen this region, the most tense we've seen this region?
Well, when you have Israel and Iran directly involved like that and firing on one another, and there's always room for miscalculation. I mean, surely Iran knows when they launch those missiles, those ballistic missiles, that most of them would be intercepted, and they were, because Iran is very well aware of how strong the defenses are in Israel, and particularly if the U.S. helps out as well. But yes, this is an escalation that nobody wanted to see go this far. But let's go back to October 7th. No one imagined that there would be such a horrific attack on the state of Israel. And from there, of course, the proxies were back and forth with Israel, and Israel is determined to make these wars end.
Yeah, it was October 8th that Hezbollah began to fire rockets into Israel. Hezbollah, of course, and Hamas, proxies for Israel. Martha, we know this is early on in this campaign, whatever it is going to be, and we know you're watching it and talking to your sources. We'll come back to you when you have more. Appreciate it.
You bet.
So the IDF just released this video statement about what they are calling precise strikes on military targets in Iran. Let's take a listen. All right, so we'll look at that in just 1 minute. I want to bring in ABC News contributor Mick Mulroy, who has served as Deputy Assistant Secretary and Defense for the Middle East. Mick, Israel has been warning that they could retaliate for Iran's targeting of Israel with missiles on October 1st. They have been saying they will do it at a time of their choosing. It seems tonight is that time. You listened to Martha's reporting. What are your first thoughts as this is just getting underway?
So, Phil, it does appear that this is the time. Perhaps they were waiting for the U.S. to fully get our THAAD missile system in place, which could be very important when it comes to any response by Iran. But it does sound like, as the IDF put out, that this was against military targets. That is clearly what the United States wanted to see. They didn't want to see nuclear facilities struck or energy infrastructure, where it could have major impacts on the world economy. But military targets, as Martha said, are extensive, and some of them do reside in Tehran. So we're hearing initial reports there could be strikes in Tehran, the IRGC headquarters in Tehran. But of course, they're all over the country, and Israel has a lot of capabilities, both with air-launched ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, to really reach in and hit these locations.
Mick, in the past salvo in April, like we saw a barrage heading toward, I think it was that time 300 or so drones. It was various projectiles fired at Israel, and they were virtually all taken down by the Iron Dome. I believe America shot some of them down, UK as well. It seems to me, just as an observer of this, with certainly no military experience, that each side is being particularly cautious in their response. I mean, it's taken Israel 3 weeks or so to begin this response. Do you expect, and I don't even know what a proportional response would be, but do you expect it to be precise and cautious this evening?
So from all the statements of the IDF leaders, the Minister of Defense, they sounded like they really wanted to make a substantial impact on Iran's capabilities. So they're probably, of course, going after a lot of the missile bases where the attacks on Israel come from. But it could be substantial, and it might be an immediate retaliation by Iran. There's no requirement, of course, that countries have to wait and pause. And I think that is something Israel's also taking in mind with waiting for the THAAD system by the U.S. to get in place. But this could get into a situation where we have a complete tick for tack. So it goes up the escalatory ladder very quickly, and that is what so many world leaders are concerned about. If this starts to be a free-for-all back and forth between Israel and Iran, that's where things can get out of control. We don't know. We'll have to see how they respond to these attacks. But like you said, we have to see how substantial these attacks were first.
Yeah, and as Martha just pointed out, the ability to have a miscalculation here and things to escalate is always the concern. Mick, stay with us while we watch this statement. We've now queued it up, a statement by Israel calling the strikes tonight precise and military targets. Let's listen.
In response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the state of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. Like every other sovereign country in the world, the state of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. We will do whatever necessary to defend the state of Israel and the people of Israel.
Yeah, that's a brief statement from Daniel Hagari, spokesperson for the IDF. Mick, I want to bring you back in. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement earlier this month, and we'll quote it, when Iran is finally free, and that moment will come a lot sooner than people think, everything will be different. It's a pretty strong statement. I'm wondering if you think Netanyahu's regime is trying to bring about regime change in Iran.
So I'm sure they would like to see that. Certainly that's not ever done by airstrikes. But of course, he could be talking about leadership strikes. So we've seen Israel take out so many of the leaders of the Iranian proxy forces and IRGC leaders that are involved with them. And they've made statements that could indicate, and this might be one of them, that they intend to go after senior leadership in Iran during these strikes. Again, we'll have to see what happens at the end of that, but that is part of a military strike. The chain of command ends with the commander who's in charge of the military. So that would be considered a military strike, but obviously a substantial escalation if they go after leadership targets specifically.
You heard Martha report that the U.S. was concerned that Israel might attack some of the nuclear facilities there. We know Iran has been increasing its enrichment of uranium, especially since former President Trump pulled out of that nuclear deal that the West had made with Iran. Does Israel have the capability to strike those enrichment facilities? I mean, early indications are that has not happened so far this evening. Do they have the capabilities to really do damage there?
So, Phil, they likely have the capabilities of striking them. The issue is how hard and how much damage it would actually do to the facility. Pretty much the United States is the only one that has munitions that are really substantial. They can penetrate deep into the ground before they detonate, and they're very large bombs. I don't think Israel has that capability. That's why so many people said this would essentially start all the issues that would come from striking the nuclear facilities without actually destroying them. So I think for that reason, and obviously the United States not participating in it, as Martha said, and not wanting to see it happen, I think it's unlikely to happen. But I don't think without the United States that it would be a full strike on a nuclear facility that ended their capabilities.
And Mick, you know the U.S. recently supplied Israel with more defensive missile systems, the THAAD system, as you referenced just a little while ago. What could draw the U.S. further into this conflict? We've seen, the U.S. shoot down some projectiles coming from Iran. That was in April. What could draw the U.S. further into this conflict now 11 days to the election?
So, of course, we deployed about 100 soldiers to go with that THAAD system, and they're in Israel. Of course, from the Iranian perspective, they might view them as a military target, and they might be targeted specifically. Hopefully, of course, we have all the defensive systems in place to block that, but there's nothing guaranteed that that's going to happen. So that could draw the U.S. directly in with any of our forces being part of any kind of casualties toward the base where they're currently located. The other, of course, is if Israel gets overwhelmed, and I don't think that's going to happen, between Iran, all the proxies in the region, to include the Houthis, Hezbollah, and the militias in Syria, the U.S. might get more involved from the air trying to mitigate the threats that are coming into Israel, which could include strikes on facilities in southern Lebanon if the IDF asked for it, of course, if the president authorized it. It really depends on the level of response and retaliation by Iran and its proxies from what happens tonight. That's how the United States could get drawn further into this, but we're already well into this.
All right, Mick Mulroy, thank you so much. This is probably going to be a long night, so we appreciate you staying with us on this Friday night. Right now, I want to bring in ABC's Tom Soufi-Burridge, who is in Israel for us tonight. Tom, this has been talked about for weeks. You've been reporting on this for weeks now, and it seems it is happening. What can you tell us about the build-up to this particular moment?
Well, I mean, clearly, you know, the Israelis have been preparing for this moment for a while now, Phil. They've taken their time, haven't they? I mean, it hasn't come soon, as some officials after the attacks earlier this month on Israel had warned. But look, we've just had a statement from the IDF saying that they have been striking multiple targets in Iran, military targets. And we've also heard from another Israeli official just now confirming that energy and oil sites, Iranian oil and energy sites, are not in amongst the targets. So, you know, what is looking like the case right now, according to all the sources we're hearing from, is that Israel has listened to that demand from the US. The US clearly was pressing Israel not to go after Iran's nuclear and oil sites. I mean, Iran's oil infrastructure is highly valuable to the regime. There were fears about what a strike on oil sites could do to global oil prices, of course, just before the US election. And there were also fears, obviously, about what kind of reprisal attack Iran would go for if Israel were to hit the most sensitive sites, i.e. its oil and its nuclear facilities. That doesn't seem to be the case tonight. We're getting reports from an Iranian news agency saying there are multiple explosions coming out of the Tehran area. We don't know the precise nature of the strikes, the precise targets at this stage, but Israeli officials are underlining that they have gone after military targets. The question right now, I think, is, you know, how will Iran respond? I mean, it might be a bit premature to think about that, but I spoke to a former Israeli brigadier general the other day, and he was warning that he believed that Iran would strike back immediately. And that is the fear, that Iran could go for a very quick reprisal attack. It will depend on the scale and nature of the Israeli strikes. It will potentially, as the Iranian officials have indicated to some media outlets in the last 24, 48 hours, it could depend on how many fatalities there are in these strikes and what exact assets, how prized are the assets to the Iranian regime that Israel is hitting tonight. And that might be the calculus that the Iranian regime has to look at, and then we'll have to see how they respond.
Tom, as we continue our conversation, I want to take a live look at Israel's northeastern border with Lebanon. I know you've been doing reporting from up there since October 8th, you know, and even before, obviously, but specifically since October 8th. Rockets have been fired across this border. Immediately, Hezbollah began to fire rockets after the attack by Hamas on Israel. We're just learning, Tom, from an Israeli official to ABC on record, and it says Israel's retaliatory targets do not include energy infrastructure or nuclear facilities. That is a really important piece of information, because we know from President Biden on down, and world leaders did not want Israel to target any kind of a nuclear infrastructure. I'm wondering, when you hear that, do you think this is going to be, and again, I don't know how to quantify this, but a measured response by Israel to that barrage of rockets we saw 3 weeks ago?
Well, it certainly looks like Israel has gone for some kind of measured response here. I mean, look, I think, look, I've read Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent autobiography, and we know for a number of years that he personally has wanted to go after Iran's nuclear program. He's wanted to take it back, degrade it. He's wanted to strike it. He has, you know, under the Obama administration, been, you know, lobbying the US to join him on a potential military strike against that. Now, if you look at where we are in the world today compared to back then, we're in a much more dangerous period where, you know, Iran has struck Israel on 2 occasions. Back in April, with more than 300 drones and missiles, and then obviously at the beginning of the month with about 200 ballistic missiles. You know, a completely unprecedented attack. Those were the 2 first attacks by Iran directly on Israeli soil. The second, just 3 weeks ago, was, you know, by far the most significant. Now, obviously, only 1 person was killed in that attack, but Iran was targeting we believe, the Mossad HQ just outside Tel Aviv. So they were going for very sensitive sites. And Israel had promised on multiple occasions since then to hit Iran hard, to tell the Iranian regime that they would regret having carried out that attack. Now, I think the point to hit home right now is that, yes, it looks like Israel has not gone after those oil or nuclear sites in Iran. I think there'll be a big sigh of relief in Washington, in European capitals too. Basically all of Israel's allies have definitely been lobbying the Israeli government not to go after the most sensitive sites, the nuclear and oil sites. At the same time, we just don't know right now to what extent Israel has hit the Iranian military. So what we're getting from Israeli sources right now is that they have gone after multiple military targets. Now, are we talking about missile launch sites? Now, that would be, a bit of a tit for tat in sort of broad terms. The Israelis were hit by 200 ballistic missiles from Iran. If they hit their missile launch sites, that feels like, a sort of fair response, I think, in broad terms. Have they gone against military bases, more significant military assets beyond missile launch sites? Have they gone against naval bases? At the moment, we're only hearing explosions around Tehran, so we haven't got any indication of that. So I still think there's a big question mark about to what extent this is a severe, as Israel has been promising, response against the Iranian regime. And then again, it will come back to the Iranian regime's calculus. They will have to see how serious a response this is, how hard they've been hit. They'll have to look at their military capabilities, and they'll have to make another calculation about whether or not they do hit back against Israel. And again, we're into this dangerous game. I mean, we've talked about the war in this region spiraling out of control. I mean, in a way, we're already, and have been for a number of weeks, in a very slow spiral. And what people probably didn't realize is that when a military strike like this happens, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other country will hit directly back immediately. It's a very dangerous game in a way that's being played, where both countries are trying to make the point, deter the other from attacking them again in a more severe way, possibly take out military assets in the process, but hope that the response is not so severe that it gives the other side a green light, a very clear green light, to hit back immediately. And then you get into that big fear, which is the fear of US officials and any of Israel's allies, that this could lead, and at the moment we're not seeing signs of that, but this is the big fear, that it could lead to an all-out direct conflict with multiple strikes in either direction between the two sides. And that would be an altogether much, much more dangerous prospect for the region and for the world.
And Tom, this is a response to what happened 3 weeks ago, but we also saw back in April another barrage of drones and missiles and other projectiles coming from Iran into Israel, and that was in response for something Israel did. So as you point out, this is not one of those things that you would see in a movie where there's a strike and it's an all-out war, but this is closer to something like that than we have seen in a long time. The calculation is from Iran, or has been, that its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others in the region, would shoot rockets and sort of tangle with Israel. But in April, Iran said directly, we are going to attack Israel. And since then, the world has been on edge. So even though it takes, as you point out, weeks for a response, as this did, this really is, as you say, we are kind of spiraling in that direction in this part of the world.
We are. There is that risk, definitely. And I think, let's look back to April, Phil, and put tonight's strike, even though we have limited knowledge about it, what we know into context. We have to read the signs at this point and just what we've got from official sources. But if you think back to April, I was here just after Iran launched that massive barrage of missiles and drones at Israel. And then Israel responded a few days afterwards, and they hit, but we didn't get exactly the precise details from precise sources, but we know that air defense systems close to nuclear sites near the Iranian city of Isfahan were hit somehow, but by the Israeli military. And, you know, that was a measured response, but it clearly sent a signal to the Iranian regime that, look, we can take out your air defences right next to your sensitive sites, AKA we can also take out your most sensitive sites if we want to. Now, you wind the clock on to tonight and look at exactly what information we have right now, and if we're seeing explosions around Tehran, that suggests to me that tonight's response from Israel is much more significant, but we'll have to wait and see the full extent of it and exactly what targets Israel has gone after.
Yeah, and we know it can take some time to figure that out. Tom Sufi Burridge from Tel Aviv. Tom, thank you.